Hello. Hello, Tallahassee. How are you? I am so honored to be here. First Commerce has an amazing reputation, as a financial institution, and to be asked to come from the left coast to the right coast, to actually join you is very much an honor. I also love college football, and you know, Coach Bobby, he's a bit of a legend. So I know, I've never been to Tallahassee, so to be at Florida State is great. And then there's a reason I'm called Chip. They call me Chocolate Chip because I like famous Amos chocolate chip cookies. And he's from here. Famous Amos grew up here, as far as I know. Yes. So honored to be here. And I'm going to take you surfing with me. Yes. For those of you who've never gone surfing before, don't worry. You won't get wet. You won't get hurt. But I will tell you that when I was growing up, I grew up in Long Beach, California. I listened to Beach Boys music back then. And if you're a Long Beach kid, you figure you're going to go surf. But my mom would never let me surf. She was worried about the sharks out there, and she was worried about the big waves. So I body surfed, but I never board surfed. Fast forward a few years, now I'm in my mid-20s. I'm in San Francisco. I have gone to Stanford Business School and worked for Morgan Stanley in their real estate department in New York. I'm now working for a real estate developer in San Francisco. But the thing that's most curious to me is I'm living in a small apartment in San Francisco, and there's a revolving door of people coming and sleeping on my couch. This is before the company couch surfing got started. Surfing. Couch surf. I had so many people at age 25 visiting San Francisco that I knew, and none of them would stay in a hotel. It's like, okay, well, I'm a bit of an entrepreneur at heart, so I had my own little focus group there of people in my living room, and I would say, well, why aren't you staying in a hotel? And they say, well, most of the hotels in town are really expensive, or they're just really boring. So at age 25, on the precipice of my 26th birthday, I decided, because I had a real estate background, I would go start a hotel company, which is a crazy idea. I had no hotel experience at all. I called it Joie, which is another crazy idea because hard to pronounce, hard to spell. It means joy of life in French. And I started with a little motel in the Tenderloin, a bad neighborhood in San Francisco. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Fast forward, 24 years later, we're the second largest boutique hotel company in the world, and I decided to sell the company. I sell the company as we're in the Great Recession. I was, frankly, after 24 years of doing it, I was tired, and I was running out of money. It was a tough, that Great Recession was hard everywhere. I know it was hard in Florida, definitely hard in California. And so I sold the company, and then I didn't know what I was going to do next. And so how many of you watched the film The Intern with Robert De Niro? Yeah, did you like it? Yes. Well, here's a great quote that Robert De Niro had in the film, in which he said, musicians don't retire, they quit when there's no more music left inside of them. So I was 50 years old, and I knew I had music left inside of me, but I didn't know who to share it with. And a year or two later, I got a call from a guy named Brian Chesky. So Brian is the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb. And he's 3 touchdowns younger than me, meaning 21 years younger than me. And he's calling me and he says, well, we're looking to democratize hospitality. This little company, Airbnb, at that point was a small tech startup based in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco. And he said, would you like to have coffee and talk about Airbnb? And this was 5 years ago. And I said to him, that's great, but what's Airbnb? I had never heard of Airbnb 5 years ago. I did not have an Uber or Lyft app on my phone. I never heard of the phrase, the sharing economy. Basically, this guy, I'll show you in a second, William Gibson is a sci-fi writer, and he says, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. So the future of home sharing was out there in the world, and interestingly enough, when I was a boutique hotelier and I started my first boutique hotel, I was one of the pioneers. I was an outsider who could see the future. But now I was an insider at age 52, and this young tech guy is talking to me about home sharing, and I'm looking at him and saying, Really? People stay in each other's homes around the world? That's crazy. Why don't they stay in hotels? Well, we'll talk about that. So I learned that there was a whole new world, a whole new wave coming, and I didn't see the wave coming. So I said to Brian, I'll join you. Let me try it out. And I became the head of global hospitality and strategy, as well as the mentor to Brian, the CEO. And I spent the last 5 years with them. Last 4 years in a full-time role, and then the last year as a strategic advisor. And what an experience it's been. The company is now 30 times larger than it was when I first started, so it's grown a lot. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to talk a lot about the idea of surfing. Not because I love surfing a lot. I just learned at age 55. I'm 57 now. I learned to surf at 55. But I learned about technology surfing 5 years ago when I joined Airbnb. So technology has basically increased the pace of life. So the difference between innovation, I was a boutique hotelier. Most of the hotels in the US were predictable chain hotels. Boutique hotels in the mid-1980s came along and created small, independent, very design-oriented hotels, and it became a bit of a movement. I was one of the first there. But that was an innovation, not a disruption. A disruption happens when technology can accelerate the process of something going global. And it also allows new markets to open up. There was a whole collection of people who actually wanted to stay in someone's home who might not have actually stayed in a hotel. They might not have made the trip if they couldn't have actually stayed in someone's home, as affordable as that is. And in fact, many of the new markets for Airbnb and home sharing are people in the developing world, middle-class families who just can't afford to travel globally unless they actually are able to cut their lodging costs in half. So this is what I started to learn about what disruption is. Because I didn't even know the term disruption other than it's something you didn't do in the classroom when I was growing up. But I guess as an entrepreneur, it's about disruption. So let's look at this video for a moment. Tell me what you notice in this video over the next 20 seconds or so. Those are waves, obviously. But what are you starting to see? They're going faster. They're happening faster and faster, and maybe even getting bigger and bigger. This is the business world today. Technology has accelerated the waves. Globalization has made the waves bigger because the markets are bigger and there's more competition. So all of that can create a very anxiety-producing experience. So what does it take to learn how to surf disruption? If this is the world we live in now and there's no going back, what are we going to do if you're not someone who's ever learned how to surf? Well, I actually think there are a few qualities that define people who are most apt to be able to surf a disruption. The first one is that I think great disruptors are a combination of high tech and high touch. High tech, clearly, that's about the engineering and the science, but high touch meaning the service side of things, the psychology side of things. Another way to put it would be it's about both algorithm, science, and people wisdom, psychology. Now, just like you don't have to be a great ocean engineer or a marine biologist to be a surfer. You do not need to be a software engineer to be a disruptor. So just to be clear, I am not going to teach you any algorithms today. Thank God. You don't want that, and I can't teach that. But I will teach you a little bit of psychology today, because I think that's been my secret sauce that's allowed me to succeed twice now. I've been lucky enough to disrupt the hotel industry twice, once as a boutique hotelier, and then most recently with Airbnb as the home sharing giant. And for those of you who don't know a lot about Airbnb, today, Airbnb has over 4 million homes around the world in 70,000 cities. If you take the 10 largest global hotel companies and add up all of their hotel rooms globally, the 10 largest in the world, they don't have 4 million hotel rooms. So that shows you how large Airbnb has become. And we're in 70,000 cities, and the average hotel company is maybe in about 500 to 700 cities. So because we're everywhere, because residential is everywhere, Airbnb grew that quickly, all within the last 10 years. But in my 5 years there, 97% of the growth has happened during this last 5 years. So what are we going to do about this? Well, I think surfing and entrepreneurship have a lot in common. So let me explain. First of all, surfing tends to happen the best surfing tends to happen during storms. So you've got to embrace the storm. Airbnb got started in the Great Recession. And why was it embraced? Well, there were a lot of people who actually were out of a job, but they had an extra bedroom at home, a lot of empty nesters maybe, kids had moved on, and they're thinking, I got to make money somehow. And so they might have had a cottage in the backyard, a room down the hall, or maybe they traveled a lot and they had a home that was empty. So in the Great Recession, that made sense. Also in the Great Recession, people still wanted to travel, but they wanted to do it more affordably. So sometimes the greatest innovations tend to happen in some of the darkest times. Secondly, it's very free-form in terms of surfing. It's not like golf. You don't have to have a tee time. Not like tennis. You don't have to reserve a court. Not like skiing. You don't have to get a ski lift ticket. You just go get your surfboard and you go in the water. So it's really sort of very free-form, and so is entrepreneurship. If you've ever seen a bunch of surfers hanging out together, it looks a lot like a bunch of entrepreneurs hanging out together. It's a bit of a fellowship of men and women who sort of get each other, and they sort of are just, rebel spirits. And then finally, you need to understand what's going on underneath the surface. The best expert surfers can look and see two sets of waves coming, or two swells coming, as they call a bunch of waves coming together, and see which ones are going to actually be great and which are not. Similarly, an entrepreneur can see a long-term fad versus a long-term trend versus a long-term fad. So being able to see underneath is very similar. So, unfortunately, if you don't surf well, you end up like these companies. Now, these companies are not all dead yet, but many of them are mortally wounded, and some of them don't exist anymore. So the corporate graveyard of ex-surfers is not really full of surfers. It's frankly full of corporate boardrooms that didn't learn how to surf. And this is why so many companies today, and this is so unfair for those of us who are older than, say, 45, are so rabidly interested in hiring digital natives, young people, because they think the young people are going to teach them how to surf, teach them technology, help them to understand this new wave that is here. Well, that's fine, although I got to promise you that my next book, which comes out in September, is really about how do we actually match people with some wisdom and a little bit of age with those young people with those great, brilliant ideas of what they want to do. That was my relationship with Brian as his mentor, and as I call myself, the modern elder. So in the room. But many of these young digital natives aren't available to be hired by these companies. I mean, no one's going to be able to hire this guy anytime soon unless they got a lot of money. Mark Zuckerberg, though, has said that Facebook basically needs to disrupt themselves. Because even if you are a long-term player in the market, someone's out there to disrupt you. Now, in Facebook's case, he disrupted himself by buying Instagram and buying WhatsApp, because he saw those as disruptors. Here's another surfer that I admire. This is Reed Hastings. If you know Reed Hastings' story for Netflix, it's one that we all agree with from about 20 years ago. He was going back to Blockbuster Video to give the I think it was what did you call it before, DVD? VHS. Give the VHS back. Yes, thank you. It's a long time ago. Giving that back to Blockbuster Video, but it was a week late. And he arrives and he gives it to them. They say, $32, please. And it's like, I could have bought this damn movie. They said, well, that's the price. And then he was driving to his gym. And when he was going to his gym, he's thinking, well, when I go to the gym, I don't pay each time or late fees. I just pay a monthly membership fee. Why can't you rent movies on a monthly membership fee? And that's how DVD by mail came about. And that was the first time Reed was a surfer in terms of disrupting the market. And of course, Blockbuster Video no longer around. But he disrupted himself, and Netflix disrupted themselves about 10 years ago. And Wall Street hated it because basically Netflix decided that they were going to get into the streaming business. Because if they didn't get into the streaming business, they would be out of business. But it really messed up their net income. And Wall Street actually beat them up, and their stock price went down a lot. But guess what? Now they're doing really well again. And they've been doing well for a while now. Now he's disrupting themselves again by actually creating original content, as is Amazon. So being a surfer and a disruptor means you're constantly going back out there and trying to surf again. So for those of you who are starting to feel like, oh my God, I'm not enjoying this talk, this is getting me stressed, well, this might stress you out as well. It is all happening faster. This is how long it took these innovations or companies to get to 100 million users. Are you convinced yet? And this is when we go, who's at risk? I'm vulnerable. Am I vulnerable? Is my company vulnerable? Is our industry vulnerable? Well, here are, I think the most vulnerable organizations and industries. Anybody who's grown complacent and hasn't evolved a bit. Absolutely, no doubt about that. Secondly, people who've lost touch with their core customers' evolving needs. So they're not really tapping into what are the needs and desires of their customer. Thirdly, those who hadn't imagined a whole new set of customers, like Airbnb customers who are willing to stay for a month at a time in someone's home. And then those who don't take new competitors seriously. If you're in a highly regulated industry, this might be you. And if deregulation continues at the pace that it's going, you may be one of these companies or industries. And then finally, those companies or industries that have no clue what the essence of their product offering really is. That sounds very abstract, but we're going to do an exercise in a few minutes that'll make it a lot more concrete. All right, this is a purposefully dark slide because this is at the point of my speech when you're most depressed. Yes? Really? A little bit? Sometimes your best lessons happen when you're most in distress and, frankly, most challenged. Does that ring true to you? Sometimes when things are going well, you don't want to learn. Everything's going fine. I'm on cruise control. But when things get a little bit tough, you learn. So I'm going to tell you my story. Because I've had a few, it all sounds like, my story's all been roses, and it hasn't. Been a lot of thorns as well. So started at age 26. 15 years later, the dot-com bust comes along. At that point, my company, Joie, had 21 hotels only in the San Francisco Bay Area. During the prior 5 or 6 years, it was a great time to be a hotelier in the Bay Area because we had the dot-com boom. But in 2001, we had the dot-com bust. Then we had 9/11. Then we had a war, 2 wars, a recession, and frankly, nobody wanted to buy from a company called Joie because we sounded like we were a French company and people were boycotting French fries. So boycott those Joie people. They're from Paris. No, we're not from Paris. We're from San Francisco, which is just left of Paris. No politics. I know I'm in a political town, but that's as much as I'm going to go political. So I was in a dark place. My company, which had been growing very fast, was about to run out of cash, and I didn't know how to keep it going. So if you're a CEO of a company that's in a lot of trouble, where do you end up? Well, I ended up around the corner at the local bookstore, a Borders bookstore, which no longer exists, at Union Square in San Francisco, looking for a business book. Thinking, I went to Stanford Business School, I'm going to go back and try to learn some business because my company is in really tatters and we're in trouble. And I spent 10 minutes in the business section of the bookstore and realized that wasn't good enough for me. And that's when I went to the psychology and self-help part of the bookstore because my problem was much bigger than that. I'd called my company Joie de Vivre, it means joy of life, and I wasn't feeling a lot of joy. So I looked for psychology and self-help books, and there was this book by Abraham Maslow. I took one psychology class in college. I was not a psychology major. But I remember Maslow was the one who created this iconic theory in the mid-20th century called the hierarchy of needs theory, where people had basic needs, physiological needs, and then once you have those needs partially met, you move to the next level. And at the peak of the pyramid was this idea of self-actualization, which the US Army turned into an ad campaign called Be All You Can Be. Literally, the US Army discovered that, came up with that ad campaign from Maslow's work. And that's where peak experiences happen. So I'm reading this book, and I'm like getting my joy back. And then the bookstore manager of Borders taps me on the shoulder and says, dude, you have been sitting here on the ground for 3 hours. You have to buy the book. And so I did. I bought the book. And I went home, and I read a couple more Maslow books, and I was like, wow, if people can be self-actualized, could a company be self-actualized? I mean, it's a collection of individuals. So I took Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I turned it into what I call the transformation pyramid. For those who are really interested in this, I wrote a book called Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. So all of it is in that book. So I created this transformation pyramid, and I said, well, there's basically 3 modes of being in life. You're either in survival mode, you're in success mode, or you're in transformation mode. And I think that's true of companies as well. And in a recession, most of us are at the bottom of the pyramid. So the question I asked, that was a really curious question, is what if we applied this pyramid, the transformation pyramid, to our 3 most important stakeholders, our employees, our customers, and our investors? So we did that, and lo and behold, in the 5 years of that really big downturn in the Bay Area, we tripled in size. But what I'm going to focus on today, because the subject is disruption, is this pyramid. It's the customer pyramid. So let's talk about this for a moment, because actually both Joie, my company, and Airbnb have really perfected this pyramid. At the end of the talk, I'm going to talk about this pyramid applied to Airbnb. So the base of this pyramid is having your expectations met. No matter whether you're going to a dry cleaner or a defense contractor, the bottom line is, as a customer, you just want your expectations met. And that's the baseline. And that creates a satisfied customer. And pre-internet, a satisfied customer was a loyal customer. And then the internet came along, and it created a more promiscuous customer, because customers had all these other choices on the internet, and always Amazon, and they had all these other choices that they could buy from. And so that meant a company that was successful and not just in a survival mood had to move to the next level, which is meeting the desires of a customer. Now, if you have your desires met as a customer, you're probably going to be more committed. Great. And yet, sometimes that's not even enough to create a loyal customer. That's scary. There's one guy, pretty wise guy. I'll show you him now. Yes, Mr. Jobs. He said, it's really hard to design products by focus groups. A lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them. So what he was basically saying is, for some people, it's not about their desires, it's about their unrecognized needs. There's a need someone has as a customer, and they don't know what it is they need. They didn't know they needed an iPod instead of a Sony Walkman. Sony should have created the iPod MP3, but it was Apple that created the iPod. There was an unrecognized need that they met. So, wow, okay, so how do you figure out unrecognized needs? Well, that's not easy. So what most of us do, and I'm speaking for myself as well, is in thinking about our customers and thinking about innovation or disruption, we actually get into this line of thinking. We figure out more what people don't want than what they do want. Let me use a couple examples. And that's because we tend to spend most of our time and most of our metrics at the bottom of the pyramid, because things about satisfaction and expectations are easier to measure. Very hard to measure people's unrecognized needs, or even to fathom what they might be. So let me use an example on people don't want. I'm going to out my grandfather, no longer living, Patka. Patka, my grandpa, was a lifelong banker. And 50 years ago, when I was 7 years old, ATMs were starting to come out. And my grandpa said to me, people don't want a machine between them and their money. He was wrong. Very wrong. Yes, we love those machines. Okay, how about Borders Bookstore CEO who said, people don't want to, he said, people don't want to not have the opportunity to browse books in person. People want to smell the books. People don't want to go online and buy books. Wrong. Borders no longer around. Amazon proved them wrong. The president of Yellow Cab in San Francisco 5 years ago, before I actually joined Airbnb, the month before I was joining Airbnb, asked me to come and talk to all of his cab drivers. They had an annual conference where they brought all the cab drivers together. And he says, we're in a lot of trouble. This stupid company, Uber and Lyft, have come along, and they're actually stealing our business. And then he said, people don't want to be picked up in someone else's jalopy, their old car, as if an average taxi cab is any better than an old jalopy, right? Like, come on. So he was wrong, and Yellow Cab in San Francisco went bankrupt. The hotel industry said, people don't want to sleep in other people's homes. I was one of those people who said that when I first met Brian. I was wrong. Not everybody wants to do it, but it's a healthy minority of the traveling public. And Airbnb has that business. So you can always be a naysayer, but only some of us can be surfers. A naysayer is good at this, not so good at actually imagining the vision of the future. So how am I going to help you to surf? How am I going to teach you? I'm going to give you 3 tips. 3 key tips today, and you're welcome to get your iPhones out there, take pictures. You know, if you take a picture of me, just make sure I'm smiling. Yes, and the baby's screaming too. So the first tip is find a tool for deeply understanding your core customers' needs. You may think you have that, but how many of you have an amazing tool to address not the expectations, not the desires, but the unrecognized needs of your customers? Anybody? I don't see anybody. You do, maybe, and you don't even know it, but most companies don't. So let's talk about this. I started my company, Joie, by buying a motel in a bad neighborhood that was a pay-by-the-hour motel, so we called it a no-tell motel. You know what happens there? If you don't, I'm not going to tell you. Just know it was very busy at lunchtime. So this no-tell motel was called the Caravan Lodge, and oh my God, I was 26 years old, not in the hotel business. What the heck am I going to do buying this place and figuring out well, I figured, okay, creative people and maybe rock and roll bands and people like that will like this hotel. We had a first meeting with our key people involved in this. It was just a debacle. We had no clue. There was no alignment about who our customer was going to be. So I said for the second meeting, at this point we'd already bought the motel, I said, come to the next meeting with a magazine that defines the personality of the hotel we're trying to create. Amazingly, 5 of the 7 people, including myself, came with a Rolling Stone magazine. And from that time forward, for all 52 boutique hotels we've ever created in Joie de Vivre, it's been based upon a magazine. So let me explain this. So the magazine defines the personality of the hotel. So Rolling Stone magazine is funky, irreverent, adventurous, cool, and young at heart. So everything we did in creating that first hotel, from the decor to the services we provided, to the kind of staff we hired, funky, irreverent staff, to the kind of restaurant we created, all of that was related to these 5 words. So it's like the personality and soul of the hotel was defined by this magazine. But the magic was something beyond that I wasn't expecting. Anybody know who this guy is? It's not me in 20 years. Don't say that. Or 10 years, I don't know. Anybody have a guess? Okay. It's Dr. Timothy Leary. Anybody know who Dr. Timothy? If you're older, you might know him. Dr. Timothy Leary, famous counterculture hippie who actually was a Harvard professor giving his students LSD, whatever. I mean, it's drop out, tune in, and what is it? Say again?
Tune in, turn on, and drop out.
Oh, he did it clearly. Tune in, turn on, and drop out. Yes, he did. He looks a little hippie-ish. Yes. Were you in his class? Okay, all right. So Dr. Timothy Leary used to hang out at the Phoenix Hotel. He did not fit the demographic. The demographic of the Phoenix Hotel was rock and roll musicians from LA with 25 years old, male musicians with tattoos. This guy was in his 70s. He didn't fit the demographic of the Phoenix. He fit the psychographic of the Phoenix. Those 5 adjectives, funky, irreverent, adventurous, cool, and young at heart, those were the psychographic of our core customer. Those are the people who fell in love with the hotel. There's a great American expression, you are what you eat, which can be a sad thing to say sometimes, especially in the South. So you are what you eat. Well, I started to learn as a boutique hotelier, you are where you sleep. The hotel is a mirror for the aspirations of the customer. So I started to realize, and I started talking 30 years ago about psychographics. And the hotel industries had no idea what to make of me. It's not about demographics anymore, it's about psychographics because you get to know people differently. Timothy Leary is a funky, irreverent, adventurous, cool, and young at heart dude. That's why I like that hotel. So let's keep going. Kept doing more hotels. There were hotels based upon New Yorker magazine, based upon Wired magazine, even a hotel based on Surfing magazine. So it turned out it was successful. People liked these very personalized kind of hotels, each with their own name. Well, that was interesting. So I started getting very confident and saying, okay, let's go beyond boutique hotels. Let's create a boutique campground. A boutique campground? What is that? Well, it was going to be Outside Magazine meets Vanity Fair, so it was a merger of those 2 magazines. And the premise, but let me use a surfing phrase here to start with. While this actually will sound like a great idea today, it was 20 years ago, I was the surfer who got on the board and said, I'm up, but there was no wave. There actually was a little bit of a wave, but then there was a storm that killed us. Long story short is, here's what happened. Imagine, if you will, Starbucks long, long ago, when Howard Schultz came back from Italy and said, why is Italian coffee so much better than American coffee? And he created Starbucks. And he did something that was rather unusual. He upscaled a product and increased the size of the market. Does that normally happen? No. If you upscale a product and make it more expensive, usually it shrinks the market of people who can afford it. Starbucks proved that actually in some industries, you can upscale a product and increase the market. I thought you could do the same in camping. What do you think? I mean, it's a good idea, I think, still. In fact, this is 10 years before something called glamping came along. Glamorous camping, you've heard of glamping? This is 10 years before that. So I was way ahead on this wave, and I was just like, okay, where's the wave? Where's the wave? So we created a place with 125 of these little tents and a 40-room lodge and 12 cabins. And in your tent, instead of actually sleeping on the ground, you slept on a beautiful mattress with a heated bed pad, with a down comforter. And when you had to go to the bathroom, because there's no bathrooms in these tents, you actually got your fluffy bathrobe on, you put on your fluffy slippers, you walked about 30 feet over to the camp bathrooms, but instead of it being really grody, the camp bathroom had a big fireplace and a fire going on it, and it had a concrete floor that was polished and beautiful and warm, and it had a sauna. And it was like, really? Yes. That was the idea. It was way ahead of its time. But it did well when it first launched because it was during the dot-com boom in the Bay Area, and all these dot-commers said, wow, we're going to take our company retreat. Instead of at a golf course, we're going to golf. We're going to Costa Noa because we can mountain bike, and we can actually go play flag football on the beach, and we can do yoga. They have yoga classes in the morning, and the whole company would come there and do yoga together. It's like, really? And then the dot-com bust happened, and this business went south quickly, and I had to sell it for like pennies on the dollar. But I learned a lesson from what I would call a failure, but I will call it an experiment instead. When in doubt, if you're really a surfer, you don't talk about your failures, you talk about your experiments. Just a couple years later, after we had to sell Costa Noa for cents on the dollar, we were opening this place. It actually became the most successful upscale hotel in San Francisco. But at the time we were building it, who knew? And I said to my investors in this hotel, this is a hotel for bourgeois bohemians, what David Brooks used to call bobos, bourgeois bohemians. And it was based upon these 2 magazines and those 5 adjectives. And I said to my investors, we are going to create a yoga studio on the penthouse level and do free yoga classes every morning for our guests. And my generally overweight, all-male, balding, older investors looked at me. This is 15, 16, 17 years ago. I said this to them. They said, what? 16 years ago. You're going to take the best real estate in the building and create a yoga studio for free yoga classes in a financial district. And of course, the first question you ask someone who has a crazy idea is, well, who's done this before? And I said, I don't know of a financial district hotel that actually has a yoga class and a yoga studio in the hotel and with free yoga classes. I know it happens in spas. I know it happened at Costa Noa. They liked it there. And there's business people there. These guys said, no way. When you're on the beach, you're doing it. But when you're downtown, you're a robot. You're flying in, you're doing your business, and then you're flying out. So then they said, show me the guest satisfaction cards of the Joie de Vivre hotels that are in financial districts, and let's see if people have been asking for it. Maybe it's not an expectation, for sure it's not. Maybe it's a desire. Guess how many people in 10,000 guest comment cards had asked for a yoga studio? 0. No one had ever asked for a yoga studio in one of our hotels. Why don't you have a yoga studio in the hotel? Well, I don't know. It's a financial district hotel. You don't do yoga if you're a business person. So I got them to let me do this for 6 months. 6 months, we'll try it. And there was a line out the door. And the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the LA Times and Travel and Leisure all did big stories about this financial district hotel that is proving that there's a collection of travelers out there who are stressed on the road, especially women business travelers. 47% of business travelers in the United States are women, and most business hotels feel like they're made for men. Right? Okay, you can clap. So this hotel is going to be a different kind of customer, a different kind of business traveler, and it turns out there's an enormous unrecognized need for this kind of traveler. So if there's a message there, it's like you understand a psychographic, you understand an experiment, and you can create a success. So the first question I want you to consider for yourself is, what's your shortcut to understanding the psychographics of your core customers? For us, it was using magazines, and then it was using other trends that we were seeing, like seeing that people wanted to do yoga. Business people on a retreat wanted to do yoga. So do know that if you get this right, you're going to understand your customers so much better. All right. Let's go to tip number 2. Tip number 2 is discover the essence of your business, the true essence of your business. Now that sounds damn abstract. I'm going to have a very simple exercise we're going to do. And we're not going to do it here, but you're going to take it with you and do it at home, or not home, but at work tomorrow. Discover the essence of your business, the true essence of your business. What could that mean? Well, Gary Hamel, famous management theorist, says that the single biggest reason companies fail is that they overinvest in what is as opposed to what might be. In other words, they overinvest at the base of the pyramid, and they don't invest higher up. They also may get really wrapped up in what kind of business they're in. Nokia, the Finnish company, used to be a paper mill, and then they created rubber boots, and ultimately they became a global cellular company until they were disrupted. And they're still around, but barely. So, who disrupted them? Well, this is one of the companies. But this is a company that used to call themselves Apple Computer. Until in 2007, Steve Jobs, when they launched the iPhone, said, we're no longer Apple Computer, we're just Apple Inc. And at that very important session in San Francisco, when they announced the new iPhone, this is the kind of press that happened in the tech press, which basically said, we thought of Apple Computers as a computer company, but the true essence of that company is that they're a lifestyle company. They're way more than a computer company, and as we've seen in the last 10 or 11 years, they do a lot more than computers, and they're really working at the top of that pyramid. So the question for you is not, do you need to change the name of your company, but it's more like, what business are you in? We're going to do an exercise. Let me take you through this exercise for a moment. I think you'll enjoy it. I've used it twice in my life. Once at Joie, Vivre, it's what helped us understand that we were not in the hotel business or the boutique hotel business, but we were in the identity refreshment business. And then I'll show you what we did at Airbnb to understand what business we were in, what was our true essence. Well, first of all, here's how it works. You have two people. If we had more time, we'd actually do it up here. It'll be fun. But let's say someone's sitting here, and I'm sitting over here, and this person asks me the question, what business are you in? Or if you're in the same company, what business are we in? And then it's my responsibility to answer that person. And so maybe I would say, we're in the home sharing business. This person here, the questioner says, thank you. And they ask it again, what business are we in? And I can't answer the same way again. And you're going to ask me this 5 times. So the second time I say, well, we're in the extended stay lodging business because the average length of stay for an Airbnb guest is more than twice as long as in a hotel because it's a home. So people tend to stay longer. Third time they ask, I might say we're in the turning strangers into friends business because, frankly, one of the things that Airbnb is about is actually building a relationship in many cases, not in all cases, with people in a place you don't know. We're in the living like a local business, meaning when I go stay in an Airbnb, I'm staying in a residential neighborhood. I get to go to these little restaurants and boutiques in an area that I might not have seen otherwise. And finally, at the 5th time, we realized Airbnb is in the belong anywhere business. And that was our true differentiator versus the hotel industry. Base of the pyramid is a commodity. Top of the pyramid is a premium in many cases. If you create something that is unique, you have a differentiator, it creates more loyalty. And we started imagining what would Airbnb, this was about 4 years ago that we did this. I joined 5 years ago. We said, this was 5 years ago we did this. It was in the spring of 2013. And we did an offsite retreat. We went through all this, and we came to a conclusion that we're in the belong anywhere business. So it started changing how we even thought of the company, how we marketed what we did, including how we advertised ourselves. Many of you may have seen this ad at last year's Super Bowl. So why did we run that? We ran it a year ago, and the Super Bowl was a very important time. It was there was a whole new administration in place. Not going to get political, but what I'll say is that we, as a company, are very reliant upon international travelers. Over 50% of our over 250 million people guest arrivals that we've had on Airbnb have been people traveling internationally. So it's really important that people can feel like they can belong anywhere. And we're in 70,000 cities versus 700 cities, like an average hotel company. And the idea of staying and belonging with someone is part of what makes us different. So if you get to the place that you understand how you're different, it allows you to differentiate, which leads us to the second question for you to take with you and maybe do this exercise back in your company. What business are you in? And once you get clarity, and the best, for those who really want to do this seriously, do it with about, anywhere, maybe it's your top 6 to 12, 20 leaders in the company, each person in separate spaces so you can't overhear each other, 2 of you, and then come back together and see what you got as that 5th answer and see how comparable it is. And then really spend some time with your marketing team to say, is that who we are? Is that our essence? If it is, it might actually be quite earth-shattering in terms of how it repositions you in the marketplace and how you think of yourself as well. The third tip and the last tip that I'm going to give you today is use feedback as your compass. Now, using feedback as your compass, what does that mean? Well, when it comes to surfers tell me, since I'm just learning, that they listen to the swell. In essence, they attune themselves with the wave. Great companies attune themselves with their customers. So that means they are constantly looking for feedback. That scared me at Airbnb when I first joined because I was like, Brian, you want to democratize hospitality, but the people delivering hospitality in this company are not our employees. They're not being trained by us, really. They're part-time in many cases. Like, this is a prescription for major problems. I don't think I want to see the guest satisfaction scores of the company. And he told me they were pretty good. It's like, okay, let me start showing them to me. But then I actually started imagining what's the feedback loop for Airbnb and comparing that with the hotel industry. Now, let me be clear. While I sold Joie, Vivre, the management company and the brand, I still own the real estate of hotels. So I am still a hotelier. I don't manage them anymore. Joie, Vivre manages them because I sold the company, but I'm an owner of hotels. The feedback loop in the hotel industry is really rotten, to be honest with you. It just is. What do I mean by that? How many of you regularly, like every single time, when you are staying in a hotel, you fill out that online guest satisfaction form that they send you? There's one guy here, thank you. On average, 5% of us, when we're staying in a hotel, will fill it out. Okay, that's not a lot. And then it goes to Bethesda, Maryland, at maybe Marriott headquarters, and they tabulate it. It goes back to the general manager of the hotel. But for most of the line-level employees, they might not even see the guest satisfaction scores. Nor do they see anything that's specific to them, because the guest satisfaction forms in most hotel companies don't ask you as a customer to call out the best behavior or the worst behavior with specific individuals. So as a specific individual, it's just a bunch of data. It's not personalized. And then fourth, well, the hotel industry, like most industries, gives a performance review that's quite specific to you on your one-year anniversary. The average length of tenure for a hotel employee in the United States is 11 months. Do the math. Most people never get their performance review, their annual performance review, because they leave. That is a broken feedback loop system, and it's part of the reason, while the hotel industry is great, I love it, it has been flat in terms of growth in guest satisfaction for decades. How is Airbnb different? Well, as I started to explore Airbnb, I said, well, gosh, they are on this TripAdvisor Yelp thing about peer-to-peer reviews. It's all about hosts and guests reviewing each other, which as a hotelier sounded crazy. You mean the guest, I can see the guest actually reviewing a host. It's sort of like a guest reviewing a hotel. But you mean the host reviews a guest? Yes, that's what creates a currency of trust in a community. But when I joined, I saw there were a couple really faulty things. Number one is, if you're a guest and you had a bad experience with a host, and you publish, you go ahead and do your review, it goes up. And then the host hasn't written a review about you yet, but if you've given a bad review, oh, wow, what are they going to say about you? Retribution. So we needed to change that. So we changed that. We changed another thing that gave the opportunity to give private feedback from a host to a guest to a host, as well as a host or a guest to Airbnb. None of that has to be public on the website, on the review system. So as a result of doing these couple of small things and then a bunch of other these are two big things and some other small things, over 70% of Airbnb hosts and guests review each other, compared to 5% in the hotel industry. A completely different feedback loop. Plus, that person who gets the review as a host is an entrepreneur saying, I got a bad review. How's that going to affect my search ranking? How's that going to affect my superhost status, a program that we put in place that grew rapidly? And as such, we use NPS, Net Promoter Score, which I think First Commerce does as well, as our means of determining how we're doing. Look at these numbers. Airbnb's Net Promoter Score, which means guest satisfaction with hosts, is 72. The average in the hotel industry is 48. We are 50% higher than the hotel industry. This is part of the reason that customers continue to flock back to Airbnb. Do people have a bad experience occasionally? Absolutely. Just like in boutique hotels. I used to say to people, as a boutique hotelier, you'll have your best and your worst experience of your life at one of my hotels. Because if you're my mom going and staying at the Phoenix, irreverent and adventurous and funky, it's not her place. Similarly, you may be at the wrong place, or you may have had a bad host or a bad listing. But this is part of the reason we've been able to be so successful. So, here's a question for you. What does your customer feedback loop, how does your customer feedback loop create constant, instant improvement in your product or service? Now, if it's just getting the basics, that's fine. That'll help you at the bottom of the pyramid. It'll help you understand expectations. But the question is, how do you go beyond that? So let me wrap up by coming back to the customer pyramid, expectations, desires, and recognized needs, and applying this to Airbnb. So how did we use this at Airbnb? Well, first of all, at the base of the pyramid, we needed to create hospitality standards. We will never, when I say we, I mean Airbnb. Airbnb will never be as consistent as a chain hotel. They're in the predictability business. We're in the experience business. So we're not going to be as predictable. But can we be dependable? That was our thing we wanted to be. Let's be dependable so we actually make sure that what you got and expected, what you expected is what you got. Now, that's ideally what we try to do. We also created that feedback loop and just improved it. And that helped the base of the pyramid. The middle of the pyramid was based upon customer research. Airbnb has over 50 people globally just in the customer research division. If you took the 10 largest hotel companies in the world and counted up how many customer research people they have less than 50 people in the top 10 companies. We have over 50 just in one company. So it's helped us to actually get really clear on customer needs really quickly. And as we see customer needs evolving, we can evolve with them. Additionally, we created something called the Airbnb Open. I'm proud of this. It's one of my creations in the company. It is a global host festival. At the last one, we've had them in San Francisco, in Paris, and in Los Angeles. The last one had 20,000 people from over 100 countries, hosts coming from all over the world to share best practices with each other and to teach us at Airbnb how we can actually serve them better. Top of the pyramid is Belong Anywhere. We talked about that earlier. Belong Anywhere is that element of the unrecognized need that we think customers are looking for. But beware. What's at the top of your pyramid isn't going to be there forever. 16 years ago, JetBlue was the first to put DirecTV on their planes, so you didn't have to watch that TV screen and that terrible sound, and you could actually watch it, whatever you wanted to watch, right in front of you. But that was something that was an unrecognized need that with time became an expectation. If you ask me, I'm not speaking for Airbnb here, I'm just speaking for myself, I think that Airbnb's future unrecognized need is to be a lifestyle curator. Our greatest weakness is our greatest strength. And that is that we have just way too much diversity and eclectic collection of places for people to stay. In Paris, we have 100,000 homes. There's 100,000 homes just in Paris alone. Crazy. But when you choose to go to Paris and stay in a home on Airbnb, and you chose just that home, in that neighborhood, with that kind of style, and you picked an experience because we now have experience providers who do all kinds of things that give you the opportunity to get a local experience, and you chose that experience, and you reviewed them on our platform, not on TripAdvisor, so we actually have all the data, we know more and more about you. That may be scary, but that's the world of personalization and technology today. And by actually, like Amazon or Netflix or Spotify, by knowing you better, we can hopefully serve you better. So when you go to Boston, we know here's the qualities of the things that you're looking for. And what that allows us to do is to just get better at serving you. So this is a lot. I've given you so much. And here's the part that's really funny. If you'd asked me this 5 years ago, I didn't know any of this. I knew some of it because some of this is what I created in my boutique hotel company. But all this disruption stuff, I didn't know any of it. So it shows that an old dog can learn a new trick. But it also shows that most disruptions can be foreshadowed. So what do I mean by that? Could I see, I wish I had $1 for every hotelier who's now come to me, who originally said, you're an idiot for going to work for those guys. I've never even heard of them. Like, that's a stupid idea. People don't want. I've had $1 for everyone who came to me now and said, "How did you see that wave coming?" Well, I didn't. Luckily, I had a surf report from friends who could see it coming. And they foreshadowed it when I was thinking about, should I join these people? It's a big deal for a well-known boutique hotelier to join Airbnb and be in charge of all the hospitality strategy for the company, as well as 7 other departments. And 4 other departments, but 7 over the course of my 4 years there. But there were some foreshadowing influences that helped me to have a sense that this was coming. First of all, I know a lot about boutique hotels, and what I know is that boutique hotels took predictability, which in the mid-1980s was what all the chain hotels thought that customers only wanted, and said, no, people want adventure and experience and a place that suits them personally. Airbnb just took that 10 steps further. Allows you to live like a local and maybe have a place that's just perfect for you. Secondly, these 2 companies, Vacation Rental by Owner, VRBO, and Craigslist, started in 1995, 13 years before Airbnb. 1995, VRBO is, I'm going to rent you my space, my second home, as a stranger. That's what Airbnb is doing. Airbnb took it to primary homes. That was the big difference. But Airbnb does second homes as well. And Craigslist was initially all about Craig looking for a roommate. And Craigslist is a way that a lot of people actually find a roommate for their extra bedroom when they're actually renting a place as a tenant. So that idea was not new. What Airbnb did is to really improve the whole holistic system of how it was delivered in the UX, in the trust and safety part, and the fact that there was a payments program where all the payments went through the platform. And then finally, for those of you who have ever home swapped, which is very few of us, but the idea of saying, I have a home in Tallahassee, and I'm going to be going to London, and I want to find somebody who needs to come to Tallahassee, and so I can go to London. Good luck, but hopefully it happens. I'm sorry, but maybe it happens, right? So, smaller market here. So this has been going on since 1953. Home swapping and people actually swapping each other's homes has been going on for a long time. So the question for you to ask yourself as you leave here today is, what are the big waves you're seeing in the world that are foreshadowing a disruption in your industry? And that's a really important question to ask. Because if you actually don't look out there in the future looking for those waves, they're going to find you. I promise. In most industries, unless you're incredibly regulated, they're probably going to find you. So this has been quite a 45 minutes to an hour together here. Let's just know the following. I took you surfing. You can go home tonight and say to your kids, they say, what did you do today? I went surfing. And they'll be so proud of you. Went to Panama City and went surfing. So yes, you did go surfing. You know a little bit more about disruption. But for those of you who think that this is going to go away, this is probably one of the wisest men in the world, wisest people in the world. He's a futurist who used to be the director of engineering for Google. And if you read what he writes here, he pretty much says, this acceleration thing, these waves moving faster, isn't going away. It's just going to get faster and faster. And that's scary. And so I'm here to tell you to learn how to embrace the storm and to say that I have learned how to surf. That's me. I'm really bad. I mean, I do get up, and I'm not bad. I'm good enough so I can actually ride waves now. But this last weekend, I was with my mother and my father. They're both 80. It was my mom's 80th birthday. And so we're sitting and at this lunch for her, and I'm sitting right next to her, and she says, so what are you doing this next week? And I said to her, well, I've just come back from Baja, I live in Baja, California, Mexico half the time, which is where I'm learning to surf. And she knows I'm learning to surf, but we don't talk about it. She's about 57 years old, and she's still, scared of me with my sharks and the big waves. And so I said to my mom, I'm going to Tallahassee this week to teach people to surf. And she said, I'm so proud of you. You're going to teach, you're proving that an old dog can learn new tricks. So Thank you so much for letting me join you today, and I hope that was enjoyable. And I'm going to come sit over here.
Thank you so much, Chip. Welcome to Tallahassee.
Yes, thank you.
I hope you all have enjoyed surfing so far, and we've got incredible questions from you to ask, so please stay tuned. I'm going to jump right into the water, if you will, because we only have a few more minutes together. But the first question, looking back over your career, was there a wave that you missed? And if so, what were the indicators you missed?
Wow, that's a great question.
I thought so too.
I think the wave that I missed, that a lot of people don't identify this with Airbnb, but it happened way earlier. In the hotel industry, there's something called extended stay lodging, which is like Embassy Suites, Residence Inn, Extended Stay America. That started 25 years ago, a long time ago. I thought it was like, well, I'm not sure it's going to expand, but I think what's happening is the more, I don't have my mobile device with me right now, my phone, but the more we have a phone and the more mobile we are with our phone, the more mobile we are in life. And so there's a whole growing collection of people who are not trying to figure out how to climb the corporate ladder, but they're actually focused on just being a digital nomad out there in the world, meaning they go and travel. They can actually do their business and their travel, do their business and their career even when they're in Bali for a month or two, or then they're in Boston for a month or two, and then they're in Austin. So the whole premise of the fact that people used to want to, that people are being more mobile, I think is going to have long-term trends in housing in general, and the idea of people looking for housing that is less permanent. And so I think I missed the trend, but I've actually really seen the trend up close and personal based upon the experience at Airbnb.
I'm going to combine the next two questions because they were both good and they were both similar. This one is, speaking of millennials who may be here today, if you were an 18-year-old today, what would you do to prepare for a future in business?
I think, the thing that's true is we're going to have lifelong learning. So the structure of life historically has been a three-stage life. You learn, you earn, and you retire in Florida. And that three-stage life is getting disrupted, partly because millennials have actually given up on that three-stage life. They're sort of like, I'm going to live to 100, so I'm going to be learning my whole life. I'm going to go and live, in Chile for 2 years and study Spanish at age 28 after having worked for 5 years out of college. And the whole premise that all the learning has to happen between 18 and 25 or 22, depending if college or graduate school, is probably stupid. It doesn't mean you shouldn't go to college or graduate school, but it does mean that if you're even a computer scientist, the computer language, the programming language you learned at 18 is maybe irrelevant at age 23. So the premise of lifelong learning is not relevant to just 18-year-olds, it's relevant to 80-year-olds and all of us. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I think the idea, this next book I have, and the premise is like, well, we thought life was a one-tank journey. So there's places that you could drive to, maybe like Satellite Beach? Is that a place where people go surf? Yeah? Is that a one-tank journey, or do you need two tanks?
That's one.
That's a half a tank journey? Well, it's interesting. What? It depends on which car you have. So we thought life was a one-tank journey, and then we extended the goalpost 10, 20, 30 years. This is a two-tank life, at least. And that means, frankly, I think for people between 45 and 65, especially, it is time to refuel yourself and reimagine what you're going to do for your next 30 to 40 years. which is not the way we were brought up. So I would just say for the 18-year-olds in the crowd, that's my point of view, but you older people, you're appreciating that even more because it's really advice for all of us.
I read a few chapters in your book, Emotional Equations. I love that you quoted the prophet, and I think my favorite quote from him is that work is love made visible. I've always remembered that. And one of the things you talk about in your book is it's not enough to be the leader of your company, but to also be the emotional leader of your company. What does that
chief
really mean?
Emotional officer.
What does that really mean?
A CEO is not a chief executive officer, they're a chief emotional officer. Well, my experience, both in my own company but in others, is the following: I think we really underestimate the emotional effect of a leader on a group. So, what does that mean? It means that, in essence, the leader in a group, this could even be in a family, it could be a parent, the leader in a group sets the emotional thermostat for the room for everybody else. And so, what does that mean? It means, wow, that means, frankly, the more of a leader you are, the more senior you are, the more you're inspected or witnessed or people are role modeling you. So there's an element of understanding how impactful and contagious our emotions are, especially on people who are more impressionable. So for all these reasons, I think that emotional intelligence, EQ, is a skill that should be taught as a required course in every business school. It's not in most business schools. There are courses taught in it, but they're not required. They should be required. Daniel Goleman wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence 20 years ago. He found that 2/3 of the success of business leaders was due to their EQ, and only 1/3 was due to the combination of IQ and the amount of experience the person had in that particular kind of work. So, I think it's pretty important.
Next question. As a market disruptor, how can we, 1, get credibility, and 2, get visibility without a ton of money?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, if you find that unrecognized need in the marketplace, and it's with a collection of customers who are large enough to be noticeable, if you create that better mousetrap, it will have an enormous impact. Build the community around that. So what I would say is, I built Joie, Vivre. It became a $250 million a year company. So that was our revenues annually, from this little motel in a bad neighborhood to $250 million a year. And our advertising budget for a $250 million a year company was $100,000 a year, because we relied so heavily on word of mouth before there was word of mouse. Word of mouse being through the computer. But that word of mouth is what you have to build your business on. If you're a small, young, or it doesn't have to be young, but just a small company disruptor, you've got to figure out how to know who loves your product and how are you giving them all kinds of ways to get the word out. Because those evangelists are the ones who are going to help your business succeed and not spend a lot of money on marketing.
What can nonprofits learn from the success of tech companies like Airbnb?
Well, I think, so I'm becoming more of a social entrepreneur. I've been a more for-profit entrepreneur. The social entrepreneurship I'm doing is I've created a nonprofit that's helping people in midlife figure out how to refuel themselves. I call it the Modern Elder Academy. And we have the whole group of people in Baja right now who are going through it. You won't find it on the internet because it's in beta so far, so there's just a beta website. But you'll read about it probably starting in April or May. It'll be open to the public starting in November. What I've learned as a social entrepreneur or as a nonprofit is it's the same thing. It's all about finding out what's the unrecognized need. In this case, for me, with the Modern Elder Academy, it's the unrecognized need that the 3-stage life is evaporating, and we haven't created a new way for people in midlife to feel like there's the rites of passage and an educational structure for them to understand how to remake themselves in midlife. There just aren't many tools for it. So as a nonprofit, you might think, okay, well, that's what for-profits do. Well, I'm doing this as a nonprofit because it's a social need that needs to be solved. That's what nonprofits do, is they try to find social needs that need to be solved. So the key is just to figure out what are those needs, how do you solve it maybe in a new way, And then how do you get the word out based upon your evangelical people who are using that?
Okay, 2 more questions. And I was a Borders faithful, I'll have you know. I took my toddler daughter there, and we shut down Borders bookstore like every Friday night. So some of us do love the smell of books still.
Yes.
But on a bigger scale, there are many brick and mortar businesses who are trying to remain competitive. What would you recommend as far as strategies for them to encourage people to shop locally?
So guilt won't do it. I mean, it's a natural one to go to, right? Like, okay, come on. I mean, guilt will work for a little while. It does work for a little while. The question to ask yourself, let's use bookstores as an example since you sort of brought it up. And so how does a local independent bookstore differentiate itself in a way that people are going to use it if the experience with Amazon is so much easier and, frankly, often less expensive? So it means you have to go back to that question, what business are you in? We used to be in the business of selling books. That's what we did. But Amazon does that, and they may do it better than we do. So what business are you in? We're in the business of creating community. Wow, Amazon's not doing that. We're in the business of creating entertainment, book readings, people doing poetry readings. We're not, Amazon's not doing that. We're in the business of giving support to the local community. 10% of the profits, not the revenues, of the profits of this bookstore go to the following organizations in the community to support them. Oh, wow, you support the Girl Scouts of Tallahassee? Have you ever thought about actually getting the Girl Scouts of Tallahassee to actually send out an email to all of their members to say, if you buy here, it's supporting us? So those are the kinds of things you can think about. Wow, we're not in the book selling business. We're in the community building business. So that's just one example.
Okay, and the last question made me laugh out loud. What is the point of Burning Man?
Well, it is, what's the point of life? The point of Burning Man, if there is one, is for those who've gone, you'll understand it. For those of you who've seen pictures and heard the myths, it's not about just getting naked and taking drugs and all of that craziness. It is an art festival, first and foremost. It's thousands of art pieces all over the whole Burning Man site, but in hundreds on the playa and the main community area. But more than anything, it's an experiment in community and in almost a weirdly utopian community. About 10% of the people going there, about 7,000 of the 70,000 people, are families. I know that sounds crazy, but there's a whole family camp. And so the utopian community is the idea of, wow, as Brian Chesky, I brought him to his first Burning Man, the CEO of Airbnb. He said, this is what the world would be like if artists ruled the world. So, yes, it's sort of it's an experiment in art and unique community. And for me, more than anything, I've enjoyed the fact that it sort of, for people who go there, they come back a little bit more creative. So, and for me coming to Tallahassee, I feel very blessed. This is a beautiful place. You have a lot of trees. Damn, you have a lot of trees. And I know that means you have a lot of humidity in the summer because of that. But, I'm glad I came in January. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Chip Conley.
Thank you so much. Thank you.